Good evening and welcome to week 3 of our Bible study and our Lenten series. A quick reminder that we're reading from and exploring the book Lent is Not Rocket Science. There is a link to it in the video description. For the past 2 weeks we've been looking and meditating on the structures of the universe, and we were looking at scales that were so large that we have nothing within our human experience to even understand it or grasp its entirety. These large structures, we can basically imagine them, and in all that emptiness existing between the intergalactic space, none of these structures are very intuitive or easy to imagine, and most people try and find an analogy to kind of link that large structure to things that we do experience and have some kind of understanding about. So, for examples, for galaxies, we tend to think in terms of clouds, and we think of stars as large furnaces, and the planets we think of as rocks. The complexities of these structures are not included in these analogies, and this week we're going to get down to things that are more in line with our human scale, and we can even start with something as simple as air. Air has a lot of mysterious effects that we cannot detect, and in some cases we have no serious analogies that we can work with. Jesus did give us a few teachings, and he said that air is kind of like the way the Holy Spirit behaves, and we're going to look at everyday things with a fresh perspective, and we're going to be looking for ways we can treat these items within our understanding of what's going on and find the mysteries and an invitation to journey even deeper into the understanding as we seek God's fuller presence during our journey. Some questions to keep in mind as we get ready for this week's lesson. When we were children, we had unique gifts to see the world with freshness, and often as we age, we lose that capability. This week, we'd like you to try to take a walk around your neighborhood and see all the wonders within your vision as you're walking. Contemplate the joy that you felt when you first encountered your favorite work of art, or music, or literature. What did that moment reveal to you about God's presence and overall creation? So as we begin our lesson, we can read from John 3, verse 8. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. Air is constantly moving around us, and we hear it, we feel it, but we can't see it. And Jesus tells us that the wind is like the Holy Spirit and that we don't know where it comes from or where it is going, but we do know something about what causes the wind. We may have heard the phrase, nature abhors a vacuum, and we learn as children in our science classes that it really means that stuff wants to be moved from places where it is of higher density to those where it is of less. Higher heat to lower heat. Same works around. The wind blows when air moves from a region of high pressure in the atmosphere, and that's often caused by higher temperatures to a region of low pressure in the atmosphere. As the air moves to establish new equilibrium, the movement of these molecules is what we perceive of as the blowing of the wind. What if Jesus is pointing us to a deep spiritual truth when he connects the Holy Spirit to the experience of the wind? Does the Holy Spirit move from places where there is a great deal of spiritual vitality to places where there isn't? Is the holy wind? In Greek, the word spirit and the word wind are the same. So is the holy wind God's way of creating a new beginning for a place that has been dry and desolate? When we look around us, we may have experienced that prayer changes things. Don't always know how our understanding of exactly what happened, but prayer makes a difference. The more people who join in prayer, the bigger the difference. Maybe we can see the movement of the atmosphere from places of abundance to places that lack, as an analogy of what is happening when the Spirit rushes in to make things new. And maybe it's even more than just an analogy. So a few questions to consider before we continue our lesson. Where is the Spirit moving your life right now? What are you being moved toward or away from because of the actions of the Spirit? And finally, are you participating in or resisting that movement? So as we delve deeper into things around us, we might have seen a reflection of a rainbow from a puddle of water and oil mixed on the road next to where you're standing. We all know that oil and water don't mix, and motor oil is less dense than water. It will create a thin film on the surface of the water in the puddle, and that thinness gives rise to the rainbow of colors. When light is reflected both off the surface of the oil and off the surface of the water, it travels different distances. The combination of the two light waves will subtract some of the light that's there and show you what is at the exact wavelength for the exact angle that you're looking at it. So you might see red, blue, yellow, green, all from those reflections. It is actually the thinness of the oil film on the puddle that reveals the real colors that make up white light. And this is an analogy to the way that the thin places of the earth, as the Celtic writers referred to them, allow us to experience a deeper reality that is all around us. When we are in a place where the separation between heavenly and earthly realms is narrow or vanishing, we can see the beauty that underlies our everyday experience. And how poetic in the case of the puddle rainbows, that it is the waste products left behind on the road that takes the place of thin. Some of us might find it a good question to ask ourselves, where are the thin places in our lives? According to medical researchers, the cells in our skeletons live for about 7 years and then are replaced. The cells in our skin live for about 7 weeks. Some cells in our bodies live for years, and some, like red blood cells, live for days. The skeletal cells have a lifetime of about 7 years, probably the longest lifespan in our body, and has given rise to the common idea that we are a completely new individual every 7 years or so. But it's clearly a lot more complicated than that, because some parts of our body is new every few days and other parts are more on the scale of a decade. The key point is that we're not aware of the constant change. This gives us insight into an important characteristic of what it means to be human. Our bodies are not permanent, but our patterns are. By patterns, we mean the designs that make our bodies our bodies. They determine the shape of our ears, the length of our fingers, the coloring of our eyes, and as a natural process of our body aging, it creates new cells that take the place of the ones that have died and are being discarded. And the information stored in our genes and in our DNA instructs them to take the same form, for the most part, as the cells they are replacing. So in other words, you and I are not really bodies that live for 7 or 8 decades and then wear out and die. We are patterns that are created by the joining of our parents' patterns, given life by the breath we breathe in our other biological processes, in which we are very persistent in time and space. It is not the body that's at the core sense of who we are, it's the pattern. And we start thinking of bodies as patterns, a series of plans. It makes it much easier for us to imagine bodily resurrection and life after death. Thinking of the Holy Spirit as a power that gives life to the pattern helps me to understand what the biblical writers are trying to express when they talk about the breath of life. In all of it, I'm reminded that what I perceive of as body is much more complicated and profound than what it appears to be. It also reminds me that the patterns and processes are more than just interesting things in which we can think about. They are the core of reality. And God, who sang creation into being with the heavenly choir, according to some of the Pythagoreans we have in our history, is the great creator of the great pattern, which is the universe. And naturally, that leads us to a few more questions. What patterns do you need to pay more attention to today? What patterns are causing you to grow toward God? And which ones are giving you life? In every breath that we take, we have something like 10 with 23 zeros after it molecules of air. And that's about a mole of air molecules if you remember your high school chemistry classes. That's an almost unimaginable number. During the year of life, we breathe in and out on average of about 10 million times. That's 10 with 6 zeros after it. And traditionally, we believe that Jesus lived for 33 years, so during his earthly incarnation, using the number above and multiplying it out, he breathed 330 million breaths. Or, assuming that each breath had a different set of molecules in it than the one before it, it's not really realistic, but it's not a bad approximation. That means that he breathed a total of 10 with 30 zeros following it, molecules of air. And that's a very big number. But it only represents about 1/1000th of the total amount of air on the earth. If you work on all the math, it turns out that each breath we take contains many of the same air molecules that Jesus breathed during his lifetime. You and I are literally, with each breath, breathing the same air as every saint, known and unknown, and every sinner has breathed as well. You are breathing the air of Jesus mixed with the air that Judas Iscariot breathed every time you inhale. You can even work out how many molecules in one of your breaths was part of Jesus' last breath on the cross. It's not many, maybe 1 or 2 out of the many, many molecules that we breathe, but there are a few. And there are a few of the last breaths of Caesar Augustus, Leonardo da Vinci, Queen Elizabeth, of everyone who has ever lived. And with each breath you take, you're physically connected to everyone who's ever lived on the planet. And one of the simplest forms of physical prayer is just to quiet yourself. Try to empty your mind, focus on each breath you take. If you can carve out a few minutes today, try and pray this way. To be aware of, to be conscious of the deep connectedness of all human life throughout history. The air of laughter, of tears, of heroes, and of scoundrels surrounds us at every moment of our lives. It fills our lungs and gives us life. And that leads us to the final set of questions for this week. Have you ever imagined that you are praying when you were just sitting still and breathing? If not, could you try and pray that way today? You're not just connected to the great heroes of history when you breathe. You're connected to the scoundrels and the traitors as well. So take some time to reflect on how the act that gives us life brings us into an intimate relationship with all manner and conditions of humanity.